Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm David Foster. Today, as world leaders get ready to meet in Rome, we'll talk about what kind of post-pandemic recovery they're hoping for Europe and beyond. And later in the programme, we will look at how they, that is, the G20, hope to prevent a humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. The G20 members represent 85% of global GDP, 75% of international trade, and 2/3 of the world's population. G20 leaders not only have strategic importance, but play a key role in setting the future global agenda. The leading topics that will be discussed at this summit: the fight against climate change, coronavirus, and the measures required for a global recovery after the pandemic. Who will be there? Well, the United Kingdom, France, Spain, Germany, Italy, Turkey, the European Union, Canada, United States, Argentina, Brazil, plus South Africa, India, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, South Korea, and Australia. The Russian President Vladimir Putin, the Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, and the Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador have formally pulled out of the summit. The Chinese President Xi Jinping is also highly doubtful to be in Rome. Will the G20 leaders be able to agree on the issues? Delighted to be able to say that we can welcome out of London Corrado Mattiarelli, Research Manager for Global Macroeconomics at the National Institute of Economic and Social Research. He'll look at what this monetary policy means for people. I suppose in Rimini in Italy, we see Angelica Cristaldonati, President of ANCE Lazio Giovanni. And in Rome, we say hello to Fabio Massimo Parenti, Associate Professor in International Political Economy at China Foreign Affairs University. Daunting titles, but all human beings who have an interest in what is happening at this summit in Rome. I'm going to read out something that I saw this morning that was pretty interesting to me. Tony Murphy, Ireland's member of the European Court of Auditors, about the 750 billion euros, the recovery fund. He said, and he's warning about a risk of wasting it, that is a risk I would definitely see, that there's so much money to be absorbed in a very short period of time that there could be pressure on just to spend it on anything, whether it's really providing a lot of added value or not. Corrado, do you see what he's getting at here, that people are going to be desperate once they've got their hands on the money to get rid of it if they can, because they might be in line for a little bit more, and if they don't, somebody else might jump ahead of them in the queue?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Recovery Fund represents a great opportunity for EU countries at the moment. We have to remember the context during which it was approved. It is a landmark agreement in the sense that just before the pandemic hit, it was impossible to think about topics such as mutualizing risk or debt. And EU member states were very much keen to do so through the balance sheet of the European Central Bank. But after the pandemic, of course, there's been a reshuffle of priorities. And one of those has been that of trying to push green and digital objectives for EU member states. So these represent very long-term priorities that are not expected to help necessarily the economic recovery after the pandemic, but more change the structure of the economy in the long run, such as that the euro area economy and EU countries will become more resilient to future shocks.
Okay, so I'm wondering, and I'm going to go to Fabio here because you were nodding your head. I'm wondering whether there's a danger here that this is about sort of intentions in the long run about changing priorities, etc., as outlined by Corrado, and it won't do very much, perhaps, in the short term to help restart the European economy.
Restoring the European economy is particularly difficult because, as Corrado said, surely European Union has this long-term view in restructuring the entire mode of production according to the green-oriented and digital transition priorities. The problem is that we have a national healthcare system deficit and educational deficit, I mean in terms of facilities. So the main criticality that I see in this big plan that is surely an opportunity is a marginalization of the daily life basic problems, also in terms of unemployment.
So, Angelique, you are involved in the construction business. I don't think you believe you've received enough or been promised enough money, either in the short or the long term. Let me just put this to you. If, as Fabio is saying, healthcare, welfare, education are all priorities, absolutely, they must be, then is money being wasted, do you think, on other things that are just aspirational, like sort of wind turbines?
I would slightly disagree with what was said in the sense that, Italy, as an example, is getting 192 billion euros that it needs to spend today and within 2026. And so the real risk is that money won't be spent because we need to make our processes more efficient in order to achieve our investments. Wind turbines, are they really useless? I don't think so. I think
not suggesting they were useless, but I'm saying they might be further down the list than educating your children or treating your sick people.
They're all priorities. I think what's being given to us today is something to kickstart the economy. It's kind of an electric shock for a dying patient, if you will. I know Italy's economy was floundering, and it's the predictions for GDP for 2021 are just shy of 6% growth, which is something we haven't seen in decades. So it's a kickstart to the system, which is a very necessary kickstart to the system. All the investments that are being made within this recovery fund timeframe are investments that can be quantified within the 5-year investment frame that the European Union has given us. So what's being spent on is things that can be qualified and quantified quickly. And then you have the whole long-term chapter, which is a whole other issue, which is something that the EU countries need to come together and define together in a longer time frame. So education is essential, by the way. I believe that the future of the EU hinges on how well we can jump the generational gap and deal with youth and female unemployment. So that is top of the agenda for sure, but it is a long-term measure.
Okay, Corrado, and indeed all of you, but I'll go to you first, Corrado. We're talking about in the context of the G20 meeting in Rome. 10 of those countries which will be participating in this summit are not part of Europe. We know that China's probably not going to be there. We know that Japan, massive economy of Japan, isn't going to be there. How can they lend some impetus? What is in their interests to see out of the European Recovery Fund?
Well, obviously, Europe is a very critical conjuncture at the moment. Just to mention that at the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, we've worked on different assumptions on when money could be absorbed and indeed spent, and of course, depending on the kind of multipliers and absorption capacity of the economy, that would make a difference. But I think, geopolitically, COVID has changed a lot of things. There is a lot of
so everything is interwoven,
pressure.
if you like. The global economy is global, and obviously it brings Europe into it. And without Europe, it wouldn't work on a global basis. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there are many interests for kind of the European economy to necessarily perform badly. China has achieved a high rate of recovery after the pandemic hit, also thanks to the pharmaceutical sector. I think some economies nowadays have seen a slight sort of slashing of the GDP growth projection, for instance, Germany, because of the supply chain disruptions. So it is very difficult to think where Europe will be next year, because of course there is a lot of uncertainty on a number of issues, including supply chain.
We don't have a great deal of time in this section of the programme. So Fabio, I want to come to you first of all. We've talked about welfare, we've talked about schools, we've talked about health, and you don't think they're getting enough money. So what can the G20 do? Is it likely to be able to put any pressure on the redistribution of funds, or is it just simply going to say we want to see the European economy grow to help us?
I see in this way there is a dialectical relation between G20 and the main priorities in the European Recovery Fund Next Generation Plan. Actually, the climate change, green transformation, digital transformation are the priority of the global community, let me say in this way. But the problem is that our fiscal stimulus, it is exceptional, surely, but is not enough, not comparable with the United States, Japan, China, and so on. Our stimulus package is related, is 4 or 5% of European GDP. In other countries, it's 15, 20% of their own GDP. So limited resources with priorities that do not give a sign of recovering the economy, actually.
So not enough is being done, and what is being done is not being done in the right places, you believe. Angelica, I want to come to you. We don't have a great deal of time left, but there are two issues I want to ask you about. One is gender equality. Italy's renowned for being rather poor when it comes to gender equality. Not enough of that in this refinancing. And also you think Italy has a chance to rebrand itself and rebrand itself well at this G20 summit. What does it need to do?
Well, I mean, for Italy, it's a first ever opportunity to be the global, let's say, leader on the stage, or rather the host. Mario Draghi is hosting the G20 in Rome. This is the first time the G20 ever has taken place in Italy, and it's taking place in Italy with Mario Draghi as Italian Prime Minister. And it really is, I mean, now with Angela Merkel ending her political career, it's Mario Draghi's chance to confirm his status as the new leader for Europe. And obviously, this is a huge opportunity. As far as the gender element, as far as we talk about that, obviously, Italy is far behind other European countries. It's the worst performer in Europe when it comes to female employment. And this is a massive drain on our GDP as well. So if Italy were just to meet EU averages in terms of female employment, it would increase its GDP per annum by 88 billion euros. So that's just to give you a small idea of how bad the situation is here.
Thank you very, very much indeed. It's about priorities. In Italy's case, you're saying, Angelica, it's about women and it's about young people. It's about health, it's about education, it's about welfare, and many other things. A lot to be discussed, and thank you for taking the trouble to do that on this program. We appreciate it very much indeed. Okay, now to the second part of our special roundtable here on the G20. It's a group of leaders that will also be looking at how to get humanitarian aid to the people of Afghanistan. And it may well have to deal directly with the Taliban to do so. After the Taliban toppled Afghanistan's government in August, the country lost access to more than $9 billion in central bank reserves, frozen by the Biden administration. This sent shockwaves through Afghanistan's banking system, leading to bank closures and halting the economy. The European Union promised $1.2 billion to avert a humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan at a G20 virtual conference earlier this month. G20 leaders and ministers have agreed that they will have no option but to involve the Taliban in sending humanitarian aid to Afghanistan. But they say this stops short of political recognition of the Taliban as a government. And we have with us in our London studio Graham Smith, Senior Consultant for Afghanistan at the Crisis Group, and we also welcome Pashtana Durrani, Executive Director of Learn Afghanistan. That is an NGO focusing on women's rights. I want to read this out from David Beasley, Executive Director of the World Food Programme. Afghanistan is now among the world's worst humanitarian crises, if not the worst. We are on a countdown to catastrophe. I'm going to ask you in just a moment, Pashtana, about how things have changed in Afghanistan. But that's a heck of a statement, isn't it, Graham? Because look at Yemen, look at Syria. If it is as bad as, if not likely to be worse than, what's going on?
You know, the temperatures are dipping below zero in parts of Afghanistan. There is no way for people to stay warm. People are selling their belongings in the streets. It's an utter economic meltdown. I think Mr. Beasley's right, but he's just a little bit late. The catastrophe is already here. It's already unfolding for Afghans.
Are the people of Afghanistan getting any humanitarian aid at the moment? particularly from the European Union, because that's what this program is focusing on. But is anything getting through to them?
Of course, food trucks are being sent in, but that is simply not enough when there's an economic chokehold on the country, when sanctions remain in place, when donors have cut off development funding. I mean, Afghanistan depended on international aid at a scale that is truly mind-boggling. And now that it's getting shut off and there's only a trickle of humanitarian aid coming in, it is apocalyptic for the urban economy in particular.
But if reports are to be believed over the last year and a half, then a lot of the money that was going into Afghanistan was getting squirreled away by the wrong sort of people anyway. It was getting stolen. There was massive corruption there. Has this made a big difference, not having access to some of that money?
You know, Taliban officials have told me that they think they can run a leaner government, that they can have a smaller budget, that less will be stolen and siphoned off into property portfolios overseas. But at the end of the day, the numbers just don't add up. The cutoffs of international funding mean that the lights will literally be switched off. Afghanistan was importing, for example, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of electricity from Central Asia, and the funding for that just doesn't exist. So yeah, schools, hospitals, clinics, all of these basic essential functions of the state are now gravely at risk.
Graham, I know you had close dealings with the Taliban and with other officials from Afghanistan during the peace talks in Doha over a number of years. I'm going to ask you about your experience of that, even though you've signed particular sensitive documents saying you won't talk about certain things. I'm sure there's something you can tell us. Pashtana, let me come to you. Over the course of the last 6 months, what do you see has directly changed?
I just want to start with the fact when we talk about World Food Program and when you started your program with World Food Program, they are the people who are actually pretty much part of the problem right now. They are the ones who are responsible for the humanitarian crisis. Only 1/3 of that aid money is going to make to Afghanistan. That's the first thing. All the money is going to go into them working in the conflict zones that they claim that they are in, and they will take the management fees. They will take. They won't go out in Afghanistan to serve that, so they will employ local NGOs into that, and that local NGO will also take their own management fees. And at the end of the day, that one packet of flour that's going to make it to the poor Afghans is going to last 1 month, and everyone is going to feel good about themselves. Oh, they have
You're talking about the structure of the way aid is delivered. I understand your frustration with that, but really I'm talking about on the ground in Afghanistan over the course of the last 6 months. How much has changed?
So here's the thing. In the last 6 months, first, Afghanistan was going through a drought. They were going through all this different sort of crisis, but at least it was a country that was stable, that was importing and exporting. Right now, we don't have any imports. We don't have any exports. People from southern Afghanistan are not able to export pomegranates, all these other fruits that were supposed to make good income for them. That's the first thing. The second thing is we don't have a supply for wood for and heat for the winter. The third thing is people are coming into southern Afghanistan because of the drought from northern and central Afghanistan, and it's making it more exhausting on the already present resources. Our healthcare is paralyzed, our public administration is paralyzed, our schools are paralyzed, and the ways of income are paralyzed because a lot of NGOs have just uprooted and left. So there is no income within families. So that's how life has changed within the last 2 months.
So when the head of the World Food Programme says a catastrophe is coming, it could be the worst there is, you don't think perhaps he's exaggerating at all?
He's not exaggerating, no. He's very much right about it. It's just the fact that he's good at the fact that he's talking about it, but not good at the fact that he has a solution and he just needs to make some changes.
And that solution is simply better organisation and not skimming money or aid off the top?
Yeah, definitely. They are the biggest organization that are mismanaging Afghanistan's aid right now. So yeah, stop doing that, Afghanistan.
Okay, we'll talk about women's rights in just a moment, but I want to bring Graham back into this. The Taliban have said, and you know them pretty well, because you've dealt with them over the course of a number of years during peace discussions in Qatar. They have said that they will make simple changes that will keep the country on track, and they're not going to go back to their old ways. Now, this, of course, is one of the things that's weighing heavily on the minds of world leaders when they think about actually delivering aid. Do you think that kind of promise is to be believed?
You know, it's an incredible challenge that the Taliban now face. They have inherited a central bank that is almost empty, more than $9 billion frozen overseas. Right now, they have imposed banking restrictions, limiting the amount of money that you can take out per week. That is a sort of crude tourniquet on the currency. That's why you haven't seen the value of the Afghani, the local currency, collapse. But it also has sparked a liquidity crisis. No one can get money to buy or sell or import goods. Afghanistan was a dramatically import-dependent country. They imported 10 times more than they exported in recent years. It was an incredibly aid-dependent country. 75% of the state budget was supplied by foreign donors. And so Pashtana is absolutely right that these humanitarian aid gestures, while important, I mean, it is $1 billion that they have pledged. It's just simply not enough.
It needs to be much more than that. And to be much more than that, the world leaders, whether they be G20 or the European Union or whomsoever, need to be able to believe, or at least be able to say, we can trust them on this because they have changed. They're not the same group they were pre-2001. Do you think they can change and make world leaders comfortable?
No, I don't think that they will seek to make world leaders comfortable, partly because the Taliban just beat the West militarily, and so they're not really in a mood to compromise. And I think waiting for the Taliban to stop behaving like Taliban is not going to be a short-term recipe for success. I think that the way of effecting change in Afghanistan would be to keep the lights on, keep the electricity flowing, to make it legal and feasible to import spare parts for cell phone towers, so that out in rural areas where NGOs like Pashtana's are working, that girls can open up their phones and hit a cell phone signal and see the outside world. That will affect social change over the course of a generation. But in the short term, the Taliban are going to continue behaving like Taliban.
Well, the Taliban are going to continue being the Taliban, and world leaders are going to find it rather difficult to have to deal rather nicely with the enemy that defeated them. I'll ask you in just a second what you think they should do in practical terms. But Pashtana, I want to come to you once of all. Learn women's rights. Can you believe anything you're told about what may happen in Afghanistan by the country's new rulers?
We're not told anything, to be honest. We are not addressed. It's like they are just right now ruling men in Afghanistan, or maybe they don't think that we are supposed to be addressed in any of those things. The only two times they have addressed us is once when they were talking about public administration and women and them going back to their work in ministries, and they were like, don't come until we are comfortable. And the second time was when they were talking to the teachers, and they were like, again, don't come from grade 7 till grade 12 until we open up the schools. So they haven't addressed us for me to say that, okay, they have a new plan for us in place, or what we are told. They just simply don't want to acknowledge our existence.
But isn't this a dilemma? You would like to keep the pressure on for more women's rights. If things don't change, the G20 and other world leaders, the European Union, are going to say, well, hang on, how can we get aid, whether it be humanitarian aid or other aid into the country, if these rights are being suppressed? It's difficult, isn't it?
It is difficult, but don't you think G20 were sort of in that way when they were legitimizing the Doha deal? And when they legitimize that, they can probably pressurize the Taliban into much more rather than just, as Smith said, into acting like Taliban. The Taliban are just a small group. They also need money to keep their fighters afloat, to keep their families afloat, and they need that sort of money, and they can put pressure onto that, you know?
Okay, just a quick final word from you, Graham. I mean, how do they solve that kind of problem?
Well, some European donors in particular, and it is Europe that is primarily concerned because they're worried that the flood of migrants will turn into a human tsunami washing up on their shores. What they're saying is we should have a humanitarian plus approach, not just strictly the bags of food, the humanitarian aid, but also some additional support. For example, for health clinics, making sure that medicine and salaries for nurses are delivered. Because you cannot use humanitarian aid as a bargaining chip. It's just not allowed. You can't dangle food in front of hungry people and use that as political leverage. But what you can do is you can say to the Taliban, we're ready to go further than humanitarian aid if you are willing to work with us.
And it's that if, isn't it? Thank you very much indeed. Graham Smith, Pushtala, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. We appreciate your time, and I hope it's not too bad a winter for you and others there. Okay, listen, thank you very much indeed for watching this special roundtable on different aspects of the G20 meeting in Rome. From me, David Foster, from the team, we thank you for your patience, for your time, and hope to have you with us on another occasion. Until then.